became a superhero. That's not a statement, that's actually the title of this movie, which is a French film directed by Douglas Attal. So this is a original movie. I'm not quite sure if it's based on a existing comic book. I don't believe so. But it tells a story, as you'd probably expect, of a world that is inhabited by superheroes. So in this world, I guess you want to say it's a little bit like what if the X-Men were real. We have a society where superheroes and villains exist, and they have done for a while. So they're kind of like the celebrities of this kind of world. And they seem to be naturally occurring. However, the crux of this story involves this kind of criminal organisation who has found a way to siphon superpowers off superpowered people, repackage them into a kind of a drug that people can take, and then these people will get temporary sort of superpowers for a short time. Of course, there are side effects. There are a couple of people die with it, and ultimately you're kind of selling illegally, and therefore people are just using it for crime and stuff like this. And the actual story main focuses on these two detectives who are somewhat antagonistic towards each other. One's the kind of like the, the by the book, and the other one is kind of like the always getting in trouble, and they're kind of put together to sort of try and solve this case of these drugs being kind of put out. And then we also have Moreau, who is one of our detectives, has a somewhat of a connection to this particular kind of lifestyle, you might say. And then we have the introduction of these kind of retired superheroes that try and kind of help out as well. What'll happen? You're going to have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss. So let's talk about what I think worked in this film, first of all. The concept, albeit not particularly original, we've seen similar films in the likes of Project Power, and we've seen it in series as well with the likes of The Boys and the recent Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where we have the concept where, superpowered people are created artificially through some type of wonder drug. And it's the concept, yes, we've seen it a few times before, but it's a fun concept, and it's explored here in this world. And I think it's, albeit not particularly original, it is an interesting story, and it's also complemented by some very likeable character work by our actors here. Our two kind of police detectives are extremely likeable, and they have some great kind of chemistry together, and they've all got their kind of little quirks. Our kind of Moreau, who is I guess our main character, he has an addiction to kind of like candy and things like this, and it's a little bit of a kind of work shy, but he just kind of like he gets the job done, but he's a little bit schlubby with it, shall we say. And then we have the more by the book female kind of partner who he's kind of recently put with, but they both have some quite interesting and fun kind of character moments, and even the supporting characters I feel are have some good moments as well, and are actually kind of likeable characters. There is some interesting ideas here as well. One of the things I really liked was the kind of one of the retired superheroes. We have this older guy, and he has he's beginning to sort of show signs of Parkinson's disease, but he has superpowers, and it's kind of like, what if someone has a condition which is ultimately affecting them sort of physically, but they have superpowers. I mean, it's ultimately not a lot is done with it, to be honest with you. That would be quite an interesting subject on its own, and it's introduced, and it's kind of played for laughs more than anything else, to be honest with you. So there's not a huge amount done with it, but I like the fact that it was at least introduced. For a relatively kind of low budget film, I've got to say I think the production value is quite high. There's kind of lots of destruction, and we do see some fairly kind of good special effects work here. And the kind of the powers will remind you of the X-Men. We kind of get a teleporter like Nightcrawler. We've got people who do telekinesis. We've got guys who shoot lasers out their eyes. Clairvoyancy. There's a whole bunch of kind of powers and stuff like that, which I think is quite kind of fun. And it goes at a fair old pace. I think it's relatively kind of well paced, and you feel like it all kind of makes sense at the kind of the end of the day. What doesn't work for me, I think the movie is a little bit lightweight. It never really kind of goes into like the kind of like the more adult sort of style of kind of superhero drama that we've seen. Obviously probably not The Boys is kind of like the most extreme example, But I would say even it's not as kind of gritty as Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which kind of is a Marvel show. This kind of is a little bit more kind of family friendly. There's no real kind of graphic violence in this. There's no swearing. But what I found odd though is that the movie itself isn't about the superheroes. They're the backdrop. So I'm thinking, if this is going for a younger audience, surely you'd want to have the superheroes more, you know, up front. But nonetheless, it's not like that. It's kind of the bulk of the story is the police investigation into these, you know, superpowered drugs. And it's like, is this what kids want to see? And if it isn't, maybe it would have benefited from leaning into a bit more of, you know, grittier, adult kind of styled movie. So the tone, I think, is a little lightweight for its own good. And speaking of the story, as I've mentioned, I do think it's just a little bit of the same sort of thing we've seen before. But also I have to add, I mean, I can live with that. I mean, I don't think many people will know about the Power Broker and stuff like that from Marvel, but if you're a comic fan, you'll probably know, but maybe not the general audience. But what I do think is a little bit more, you know, I'm a little bit more unforgiving with, is the very obvious cliches and predictability that the story has. So the story pretty much goes exactly where you think it's going to go. It doesn't really do anything particularly clever story-wise, and there's some very broad stereotypes. For example, we have our mismatched police partners who initially are antagonistic to each other. Yes, we've got the typical kind of like schlubby guy character who's the kind of the maverick and doesn't kind of do as he's told, etc. And he's partnered with the uptight kind of female cop who's constantly kind of chain smoking and is more by the book. And of course they bump heads initially, but of course as the film progresses, you've guessed it, they become you know, best buddies and kind of trust each other and things like that. So that's just one example of a kind of a cliche within this kind of this movie. I think also the bad guys in this are really underserved because I don't want to spoil anything for you, but let me just say this. The bad guys that have powers are particularly ineffective. So when you're watching this movie, particularly the second half, when you really get more of the kind of the fighting and stuff, how ineffective are these bad guys? They don't do anything right. None of their kind of, and then they may as well not have had powers because they don't gain an advantage ever by having these powers. They always seem to be inept, or it has no bearing on the outcome. The fact that they kind of have or are using these kind of artificial powers, it kind of like they may as well not have them. I have to say as well, I think maybe the world of this movie is a little bit underexplored. I mean, we're told that their superheroes are relatively kind of, you know, common in this area, but I never really got the idea about how much that is. I mean, like The Boys, for example, which I think is the nearest comparison, even though The Boys is a lot more adult. I think we got an idea about, you know, roughly how many kind of superheroes there were, and where they kind of were on the kind of the celebrity sort of stage and things like this. With this movie, I never really got the impression of like how common are they? Are they just in France? Are they kind of international? I don't think the movie does a good enough job of world building, to be honest, in this film. It just feels like I never really felt like I completely got where this movie was coming from in regards to the world of these sort of superheroes. And when we do see the superheroes in costume, I have to say I think the costume looks a little bit like cosplay, to be honest. I think they didn't do the best job with some of the kind of even though I think you can get away with some sort of garish costumes, and again I'll use The Boys as an example. The costumes in that series I think works for the context of the film. This movie, it looks like just the people are wearing cosplay. Overall, though, it's still a fun movie, and I think it's an enjoyable film, certainly an above-average film for me, although I don't think it's really does anything particularly exciting with the genre. So I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.